Delighted to be joined by Football Weekly host, TalkSport presenter, and all-round Cambridge United superfan Max Rushden. Max, how are you getting on?
Yeah, good. I feel being called a super fan at the age of 42 almost feels embarrassing, doesn't it? I don't have photos of all the players up on my wall. And at 10, I had posters of every footballer I could get from Shoot and Match magazine. I was pretty indiscriminate. It could be Robert Ullathorne, it could be Steve Walsh. I didn't care. I'm very well. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Why do you not have a poster of Wes Hoolahan behind you?
I mean, it's a good question. I haven't sourced one. If one arrived at my door, I would probably put it up. It's really interesting, isn't it, about Wes? Not that I've met him, and not that I should be that familiar with him, but he's such a brilliant footballer, and it's so interesting how loved he is by everyone in the world except for anyone who happens to be the manager of the Republic of Ireland. That's that's the running theme, isn't it? And by all accounts, you will know better than me. There have been hours and hours of phone-ins of why haven't we found a space for Wes Hoolahan in the Ireland team? And I can't really. I honestly, I couldn't tell you who Ireland's starting central midfield is at the moment, but I'd be surprised if Wes wasn't good enough to do a job for you still.
We've been half considering floating that idea out there, but only in a semi-ironic way, that this 39-year-old could still do a job, and a significant one for Ireland. For people, a lot of people just haven't been watching him play, obviously, for Cambridge United this year. How good has he been?
Well, as someone who's never really watched him play until this year, certainly not in detail, it's very strange in League Two to have a central midfielder who comes short for the ball, always tries to keep the ball, never ever just hooks it over his shoulder, never just plays a ball into the channel like a percentage pass, and sort of dictates the play. And it's not only that, it's not only sort of taking it off the centre backs and starting attacks, it's then being there to create and to score. I was doing a Cambridge United podcast, which I suspect the Venn diagram of people who listen to this, and that is small, and was talking about, I think he's the best central midfielder we've ever had. And I include, obviously we almost got into the Premier League. We played a style of football that avoided that part of the pitch for most of the time, right? So, Ireland fans will be, they will know that style of football. I can't think of a better central midfielder that we've ever had in our history. I'm obviously just I'm in a haze of promotion glory at the moment, but he's such he's a dream of a footballer. He just has time on the ball. He can get out of tight spaces. His distribution is beautiful, and he seems, I've spent no time with him, but he seems like a really down-to-earth, humble bloke who just wanted to play football, right? The reason he plays for Cambridge is not because he desperately wants to play for Cambridge. It's just near his house, and so, that's a great reason. He was on trial last year. I say he was on trial. Basically, Cambridge was on trial for him, and then he decided to go and play in Australia. I don't blame him for that at all, and it didn't work out there because he got injured. So we were lucky to get him, and I don't know if he's made his mind up what he wants to do or if other clubs are interested, but hopefully he just won't move house, and then we'll still be the nearest club for him that isn't Norwich, and so he'll be with us next season.
I've seen that there's been this incredible training regimen set up, especially for Wes Hoolahan, where he doesn't train until Tuesday or Wednesday, where he does a couple of days where he's just doing stretches and he's just on the exercise bike, and that's it, and he just shows up and plays at the weekend. It's this amazing scenario for him.
That's what any 39-year any player of that age should really be doing. Maybe don't bother with training. Yeah, there was a sort of worrying time towards the end of the season where the fixtures had piled up a bit, and he played on the Saturday and we'd win, and then he wouldn't play midweek and we'd lose, and then he'd play on the Saturday and we'd win, and it was really important. Actually, we won a game at Leyton Orient on a Tuesday without him, and it was like a kind of we can actually do. It's possible to win a football match without Wes Hoolahan. But yeah, he's been managed really well by a manager who's younger than him, And he said that, and I think that's, it's just super smart, isn't it? Don't kill yourself, and he can train however he wants, or if he doesn't want to train at all, I don't mind, And I think the players didn't mind either. I think the players around him totally appreciated what he gave to it, and B, how much he cared, given the highs that he's had, and given that he scored that goal with his right foot in the Euros, which I presume you've watched a lot of times. He really cared, and it meant a lot to him. You could see on the pitch, whether we were winning or losing, he really, he really wanted it,
We'll be watching that goal on loop all summer while everybody else is at the actual Euros this year. Did you have much of a sense of Wes Hoolahan before this season?
I think, hilariously on Soccer AM, we called him Wes Hula Hoops. That's the sort of, that was the level of, it was affectionate, I think. I knew he was good, and I obviously watched him play in major tournaments, or in that major tournament, and at Norwich, I knew that he was completely loved. But I didn't, I didn't understand the cult of Wes Hoolahan until this year. That's for sure. And that's the funny thing, especially Norwich fans. But I think, if you ever send a tweet about him, the amount of Ireland fans or Norwich fans or whoever who also sort of love him equally, it's all very much like, he's yours at the moment, but he's really ours. It's that kind of, that ownership that, say, Norwich fans have over this player that no longer plays for them is a real sign of sort of, there aren't that many players that have that kind of standing that just seem to be, wherever they happen to be, everywhere they've been before, they are still loved. I mean, I don't know, does the whole of Ireland love him?
Yeah, for the reasons that you say, the sort of in absentia midfielder who looked amazing with every minute he played on the bench, with Giovanni Trapattoni just not rating his talents. There's one of our contributors in the show, Stewie Byrne, who played with him at Shelburne, wrote a song about him when he launched his music career recently. This is the sort of love that people have for him. It's weird. It is very interesting that you're also feeling that, and that even that we go about having this conversation, that he is still this figure that people are not so much fascinated by, but just almost in love with. There's nobody who has a bad word to say about him from a football fandom perspective.
But there he is, he's loved. And also there's a weird thing about, almost he may be loved more because he didn't play every minute of every game, because there's a possibility that, Denmark still would have beaten you in all those games that you relentlessly played against 5-1,
no, Wes would have scored 4.
Every game was a 0-0 draw with Denmark until that one. But, there is a chance that, there's a myth around players that, they weren't there, and sometimes you can play better if you're not on the pitch. But I thought it's sort of heartwarming to hear and heartening to hear that he's just got that respect sort of wherever he's gone and wherever he goes.
How are you guys set for League One? Is he going to be a big part of this?
I don't know if he's going to be there. I mean, we don't know about him, and Paul Mullin is a centre forward who scored, 32 goals, and up until then in his career he just hadn't ever done that or sort of been in danger of doing that. And I suspect someone will come in with more money for him. So if we don't have those two, I think it will be tricky. But we sort of see it as a free hit, I think. I mean, obviously, I'm thinking can't be that different to League Two. Might as well just go up again. But if we keep those two, I think we do okay. But I at this stage, I don't know or care massively. It's been so long since we were at this level. It's about 20 years, I think. And also because of the pandemic, actually, I've seen more games than I've seen in the last 10, 15 years. Because I'm a bit of a plastic sort of glory hunter. Cambridge, it's the wrong team to pick to be a glory hunter for. But because I'm working, I'm in London, and I play on a Saturday, I just don't go to many games. And so because of the pandemic, because I couldn't play football, because, I've been watching on the iFollow, and I really hope that remains for so many. It's really tricky. Obviously, we want people to go back to games, and we want people to, that's the way that clubs will make money. But I think there are lots of lower league fans around the world or around the country who don't really live near where their team plays. And I feel more of a connection now. And I think not just because we got promoted, but because I watched every game. You know, I know about the players. And if you don't do that, then you sort of don't quite have the same sort of connection.
That's interesting. So, like, have you felt less of a connection then with the top tier clubs, the clubs that you would be more involved with on a professional level?
Not really, because I think, you know, when I watch them on TV most. I don't go to that many games just for the, you know, the way I sort of feel in a way quite lucky that I've managed to engineer this career in football where I ostensibly don't have to leave my house, or if I do, I have to go to like the Guardian, which is 10 minutes that way, and TalkSport, which is 10 minutes that way. And it's a very lazy way to consume football. But no, I think it is a weird scene, you know, and I don't think we need to repeat the cliches about, you know, fans, football being nothing without fans, et cetera, et cetera. And look, the only reason it's carried on really is financial, right? But, you know, it was lovely to see some fans at the FA Cup final. And I think it, you know, unless you can go back in time and replay that whole season without a pandemic, it's very, very hard to know if fans at Anfield would have meant they wouldn't have lost 5 or 6 games at home in a row. You know, ditto Everton's home form is like shambolic. And, you know, would West Ham have done as well, because their fans can be a bit prickly. Did they lose at home to Newcastle on the first day? I mean, would that have changed? I don't know. So I wouldn't feel I'd feel less connected to the Premier League. I think, like a lot of fans, I really enjoy it. And I enjoy some of the football that some of the teams play. I also find, you know, the ownership of some of the clubs really quite troublesome. And, you know, do you know what? I have an affinity with Tottenham. My dad's a big Tottenham fan, but it's not one that keeps me awake at night. I want them to win, but I don't really mind if they lose. I really don't envy fans of really big sides. Yeah, they get to go to European Cup finals, etc., and something that Cambridge will never do. But if your expectations are so high, then actually I think you get less pleasure from it, because if you expect to win every game or most games, whereas I don't ever expect to win a game. So every time we win, even though we were on this great run and we got promoted, I didn't expect any of it. And so it was just like a relentless surprise and a happy surprise. And I think in a way, I think, you know, your people's love of football teams are very different, and there are lots of different ways to be a inverted commas proper football fan. And people get very angry about people who support teams in different ways to them, because football fans are just angry about stuff, aren't they? For reasons I don't quite understand. But I don't think I would. I'm very happy that I support a rubbish football team. You know, I think it leads to a happier sort of football existence, if that makes any sense.
It's certainly far more soulful, I'd imagine. Like there's this emptiness that comes from your team that has spent billions of pounds to get to the very top of the pyramid, and then all of a sudden they're playing Europa League week in, week out. May or may not be speaking from an Arsenal perspective there.
No, I think there is. But then again, it's sort of, that's through no fault of your own, is there? I mean, I think if your football club has a soul, you're lucky. Like ours does, it's well run, the manager's popular, we've got nice players, etc. You know, the same can be said for Leicester City, but they had no control. They could have easily been taken over by an incredibly rich, horrible owner, you know, and who had no sort of vision to how to make fans happy. So I feel sorry for fans who, and that goes all the way down the pyramid as well. You know, you feel sorry for fans of, you know, I think how Blackpool had years of these terrible owners, and you know, you think about Bury and Macclesfield who don't exist anymore. You know, you just have to be lucky, because you have no power in this. You know, there's this thing today about how football should be regulated, and I'm minded to agree with that. Sort of think the FA and the Premier League, you know, why haven't they been able to do that? But you know, they are in a tricky position because it's hard to balance the whims of the big clubs and trying to keep them happy. But I think that's important, and I think, and I hope that means that, you know, fans, we get to a stage where, you know, fans of, it doesn't matter what club you support, that you have enough power and control or at least a say, so that you feel a sense of wanting, you're all trying to do the same thing, be it, say it's Tottenham, right? You all want the same thing. But if you feel you have no power and no control, I think that makes it very difficult.
Yeah, so I think we've definitely come to the realization that maybe football clubs could do a lot better to realize their own social value in life, which is strange because almost the year we've had, despite there being no fans, the Project Restart came with the Black Lives Matter scenario, players taking a knee at the start. In the middle of the season, you had Marcus Rashford feeding millions of kids around England, and then you had the Super League fallout. It did feel that this was a season where this acute realization of that social value, as I say, of footballers and football clubs just became far more hammered home. Like there was always this sense of keep football or keep sport and politics separate, or keep them and society separate. Whereas this year they've kind of come together and nobody is really denying that they should ever be apart.
Yeah, and I think social media has something to do with that. Well, that's a double-edged sword, of course, isn't it? Because a lot of social media is really terrible and has sort of led to those kind of movements as well. It's very hard to know, how much power do fans really have, and how much power can they ever have, and also, we're all hypocrites as football fans. We're all like, we hate these billionaires, and Arsenal fans going, get the cronkies out, and then there's another billionaire, and suddenly like, oh, I quite like this billionaire just rips off musicians, so that's sort of not really as bad, so that's fine. But then as hypocritical as my Spotify premium account would tell you, yes, I think what people want, and it's really interesting, is the game is meant, the whole football for most people, is that escapism, right? It's that thing where they don't have to think about things in the world that are shit. And can we swear on this?
Yeah, please. Okay. It's encouraged.
It's encouraged. Okay. So I really sympathise with, say, Manchester City fans, who they've had a terrible run for so long, and they get all this money and they have all this success, and then people start saying, yeah, but do you know where that money comes from? And I understand why they are defensive, and by saying this out loud now, I'll get abuse. You will, just by sitting there on the Zoom call. They sort of become. Nick Cohen wrote a really good piece about this in the Guardian the other day, and people have written about it before. That you're almost more of a fan if you do stand up to you say, listen, we like all this investment, but I want to make a point about human rights. Like some poor Man City fan who grew up watching sort of Richard Edghill and Terry Phelan and Michel Vonk. Do they think, well, in 20 years you'll be the champions, but people will be saying, yeah, but have you seen the human rights abuses in Abu Dhabi? And they'll be like, well, what? Why do I have to worry about? That's a really. But sometimes you're confronted with difficult things, right? And that is, the same way with the Newcastle. When Newcastle were going to be taken over by the Saudis, and God, that was complex. And I sympathise. I had super bright mates who are Newcastle fans saying, yeah, well, it's not our problem because the government deal with Saudi Arabia, and it's not an invalid point. But then it's sort of, what do you want your football club to be, and what crimes would your owner have had to commit?
You mentioned social media there. It's something I just wanted to chat about briefly with you, because I guess one of the other things that I neglect to mention there is the blackout on social media a couple of weeks ago, and that kind of came obviously as a result of just a string of horrific, misogynistic, horrific racist abuse that players, that pundits were suffering. And you were writing about that, and by no means were you comparing what you've received to them. But I just found it interesting, just from your own personal standpoint, that you were talking about the abuse that you've received on social media, because I've always noticed, just following you on Twitter, that you would amplify some of the trolls quite often. A lot of people do it and do it quite well. And I always found that that's a really funny and effective way of dealing with it. But I think you mentioned in that column that you'd started to rethink that. So I often wondered, how much did that actually get to you, and how much have you started to develop your thought process on actually amplifying those trolls online?
So I think that where I'm really lucky is, and I've said this before, I think if Twitter had been what it is now when I got Soccer AM, I think it existed, but it was tiny. I don't think I'd have lasted there. I think I'd have found it really hard. Right. But by the time Twitter got sort of popular, I was comfortable enough in my own skin as a broadcaster to think, well, I think I'm doing quite a good job. And obviously lots of people don't, and I'm told on a daily basis that, but I don't sort of care. And that's sort of the only way you can be, I think, to deal with that. I've always found it really funny, actually. I've always think, what a weird thing, just sort of weird thing to do, to just sort of, for example, at the moment, I'm doing the afternoon show on TalkSport Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It's really fun. And I do it with Paul Hawksby, who's like brilliant broadcaster, and we have a really good time. And it's a really sort of well-balanced show where we talk about issues and we talk about not just the top four, and we, it's just a nice listen. It's not controversial. It's not trying to be sensationalist. And at 1:01, the same person just tweets TalkSport. It comes on the screen right in front of me going, this, infantile, woke, snowflake wanker, ruining TalkSport. I bet your figures are through the floor. I'll be back at 4 p.m. Like, literally, like without fail. So I think there's this a bloke called Cyril. Like, what's Cyril doing? Like, what a weird thing. What a weird thing to get so... There are so many radio stations. Like, why do you have to tell me that? And, like, genuinely, I just find it funny. And I have in the past, like written sort of parody songs about it. I definitely used to, a bloke started a Sack Max Rushden account, which had like a manifesto and like a 10-point plan, which included like refusing to buy any Gaviscon until I was no longer the voice of Gaviscon. And so recently I'm no longer the voice. So if he is listening, you can now, drink it to your heart's content.
On the manifesto.
And I retweeted that, and I got him loads of followers. He didn't have any followers, and then he suddenly did. And I think what I thought was, and presenters are very different. I know presenters at TalkSport, and that's, in a way, that's the most immediate, because that is coming. You can hide that screen, but that is on that screen in front of you while you're on air live. It's different with The Guardian. We do the pod, it's out later. I think most people on TV probably aren't scrolling through their phone while they're on it, etc. But some people do. Like, it never, it doesn't bother me at all. And, it's really funny if you get like 5 people going, I love that section, I love that, I love that, I love that. Well, you can read them out. If you then follow it up with some bloke going, this is the worst thing I've ever heard, it's kind of funny. That makes your content funny. But like, loads of bosses told me to stop amplifying it. I think because they sort of think people will start to believe it if you keep saying that. Maybe they're right. It's more that I've seen what it does to other presenters, and especially, the abuse that women get, and the abuse that anyone who isn't white gets is much more targeted and can be much worse. And I guess my feeling was there's so much sort of rage and anger on social media. If I amplify it, it might encourage those trolls. There are 2 things. It might encourage those trolls to troll people who don't deal with it well, right? And that's no criticism of people. People deal with these things in different ways. And B, quite often, if you quote tweet somebody saying, I hate you, Max, you've ruined my life, then you get some sort of well-meaning followers, they're piling in on them. So you're not really helping the situation. There's just enough rage on social media to just try and not have any. And I'm sure I'll retweet somebody who's rude to me again, because I'm not really thinking about it. When I stand back and I think about it sensibly, I think I don't need to engage with that person. And I used to just mute as well and let people shout into the abyss. Now I block people. I'm quite polite about it. Normally I'll say, hello, I now block people. So if you're rude to me once more, then I'll block you. I presume you don't care, but I'm just saying, because I just sort of feel like it's nice to be nice, right? It's nice to be polite, even to people who aren't. Maybe it might make 1% of those people think, oh, hang on, I didn't need to tell this person I hated them. I could just hate. There are lots of broadcasters, and I'm sure you're the same, that I think are appalling, right? Hopeless. But I could just think that in my mind. I don't need to track them down and tell them. It's a weird thing to do. So I have changed my opinion a bit, because I think if my social media can just be sort of fun and nonsense, or like quite serious points about things I care about, well, that probably helps more than amplifying people yelling at me a little bit. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really make any difference to anybody what I do, I imagine, but that's sort of how I feel about it.
You're speaking from the standpoint there of somebody who seems to have developed an extraordinarily thick skin. Like, I think obviously you give the reason there for timing and social media not being too powerful in whenever you started in Soccer AM, but maybe that period of time at Soccer AM develops a thick skin as well.
Yeah, I guess really hard to tell. It's hard to tell if you're sort of born with that, or you develop it, or you. I think part of it is not really taking it very seriously. Like I'm hopefully a professional and I care about what I do and I want to make my shows as good as possible, etc. But I also am really aware that A, they don't really matter, and B, I'm no one is indispensable, right? I would be sad if I got sacked from all my shows tomorrow, but everyone else would get over it pretty quickly. And so really what you're doing is, you're just chatting away. And yes, some people, especially with some people who really like the pod or like the radio shows, you're a big part of a big part is probably pushing it, but you're a part of their routine, right? And that's a really nice thing. And you get messages from listeners saying those things, but you're not exactly a central cog in their wheel of life, are you? So it just, you're in a really lucky position without getting sort of too sort of trite about it or try and be too deep about it. You're in such a lucky position doing this thing that so many people would love to do. And you've been incredibly lucky. You can be really talented or not, but you have to be really lucky, right? Because there are so many people who like to do it. So I just try not to take it seriously. So that's probably why I find it funny when other people are taking it incredibly seriously. They're saying, you are the only 2 hours of TalkSport I don't listen to. And you're like, well, it's probably good to have a break, isn't it? It's probably good to have you must have some chores and, you must need some sleep as well if you're listening every other hour of the day. So yeah, I don't know. I think if you are comfortable in the work that you're doing, then you don't care what people think. And, I've definitely done shows where I've thought, this didn't work, or that didn't work, or this isn't going so well, or I wasn't quite as good as I, would have liked to have been. And then occasionally people will hit you. If somebody says something that you go, oh yeah, actually that wasn't that great, that's when it can hurt a bit. But if you feel what you're doing is good, not everyone's going to like it. So you just, that's fine.
Can I ask, do you ever flick on the TV on a Saturday morning and say, yeah, time for Soccer AM?
Well, I'm on air.
You're on
TalkSport,
okay.
so I don't. But it is quite often it comes on in silence, and I see them sort of bouncing around and think, oh yeah, I used to do that. And what I think is really interesting about that show, it's like it's never really had, in relative terms, that big an audience, right? I think at our peak we got like 650,000. When you're in it, you think the whole world is watching that show. And really, like in the UK, like 65.5 million people weren't watching it every Saturday. And I mean, people have written a lot about that show in the sense, how it's evolved and how it's changed. And I really feel it's basically the same as it's always been. It's like a footballer, an actor, and a singer sitting on a sofa, chatting about football with some goals and some jokes. And obviously the jokes change depending on who's telling them and who's writing them, and because people are different and their sense of humours are different. But I don't think that show is, and I think the show has moved on because it had to from how sort of laddie it was. And I was arguably a big part of that, not because I have a huge social conscience, even though I do, it's because I'm really not very laddie. And when they worked out how square I was, well, they couldn't really do the laddie bits because I was just really bad at them,
How do you mean Soccerette?
I mean, well, specifically that part, but, lots of other parts of it, I was, I'm from central Cambridge and was in, Cambridge County Youth Orchestra, right? That's not cool. You can't hide that. It's not like this is a cool person doing this. This is just a sort of general bloke doing it, I think. But it's funny. I was incredibly fortunate to get that gig. It came out of nowhere, and it was really every single every card aligning, if that's the phrase. Everything just fell into place in this ridiculous way, and I was so nervous. And it took me a year or two at least to get comfortable to a point where I felt I was doing a good job. Not everybody did, obviously, but I did it for 7 years, and it was honestly like getting paid to just muck about. It was frankly ridiculous. So like, I think of it, and hopefully not with rose-tinted spectacles, I just think of it incredibly fondly as what an extraordinarily privileged job to have. You know, I watched it growing up and always thought it was funny, and then I got to do it, you know.
You've spoken in the past about maybe not having enough creative license to do what you wanted to do on the show. So what is the best thing that we, the audience, missed out on that you had in your brain that just wasn't allowed to go on air?
Oh, that's a good question. I did want the week that Keys and Gray were sacked was quite a fraught week at Sky, and we weren't allowed. They were like not allowed to mention it. It was obviously that biggest story. It was like I can't remember what was happening that week in football, but within football, that is what everyone was talking about. So I said we should get a full-size stuffed elephant and put it in the studio and never mention it. And that was denied. I mean, I don't know how easy it is to find, or, you know, one of the props boys or someone with work experience would have to make a full-size papier-mâché elephant. It would have been brilliant. But it was, that was rejected, sadly. So yeah, that's probably as good as it got. I mean, I don't think my ideas were necessarily brilliant, but when they're yours and you think they're funny, like I love anybody who listens to me on the radio or the pod will know that I really like a long running gag. You know, like Mark and Lard used to do, you know, the same gag, repeat it over and over again. And it's funny, and then it gets really unfunny. And then eventually people are just eroded down by it. And so there were so many things where I thought, that's funny, but we have to do that for like 25 weeks and it'll get ridiculous. And there was very much a kind of, we'll look a bit shit if we don't. And I was like, you have to sort of plow through that bit. I mean, you know, the comedy is subjective, right? And so it's very hard to have arguments with people where someone says that isn't funny and you say, no, it is, but you can't, you know, I might have been wrong, they might have been wrong, no one's actually wrong. It's just I've got that control over my radio show. So if you don't like me on the radio, that is absolutely my fault. Do you know what I mean? That is literally like if people don't like that, they are my ideas or ideas that I've been part of having. And so I need to take full blame and responsibility for those.
And was there not a sense that this is a 3-hour long show? We can try a bit of everything?
On Soccer AM?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, it would be wrong to say everything I suggested was rejected. And it'd be wrong to say that everything's, you know, I suggested things that were allowed on that were shit, right? You know, like that's fine. I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think we could have, you know, like I said, it's just so subjective. So there were just things that I thought, but we could do it like this, or we could, you know. I think if you're in control of that, then you have, you know, it just gives you that power and that kind of. I think I found sometimes I'd have an idea, and the producer who'd be like, didn't think it was funny, would be like, all right, I'll let you have it. But then you're sort of under pressure for it to work. And actually what you want is like an environment where people are like, yeah, that's brilliant, it's great. And then you do it with conviction rather than going, I've got this gag coming up in an hour or this bit of the show that I thought is brilliant. They think it's shit. I've fought for it. And now I've got to deliver it. And if I fuck it up, they'll go, well, I told you. And you're like, actually, that's sort of not the environment that you necessarily want there. But look, you know, it would be ridiculous for me to say everything I did on that, all my ideas were great and everyone else's were bad. It's ridiculous. That is certainly not the truth.
And did Keys and Gray change things at Sky?
What do you mean?
Did that change the show for, like, were you all of a sudden like, hold on a minute?
No, it didn't really affect Soccer AM at all. I mean, the interesting thing about those, you know, we were on Sky and we could have easily been on a different channel, you know, like you're in a different office, you're miles away from everybody, everybody's super busy, people who are working on Soccer Saturday are working on Soccer Saturday, you're working on Soccer, you know, like you see each other in the canteen. And obviously we occasionally use like Cammy or, you know, Merce or Jeff or whatever to do things. But really, you're just your own entity. That didn't really impact us at all, no.
Max, I've kept you long enough. Wes Hoolahan is where we started. Thank you so much for giving us the lowdown on Wes Hoolahan, and exciting times indeed. Also, an absolutely epic looking pint he was drinking on the pitch the other day.
Like
Cambridge Guinness. Turned out pretty good.
Well, it looked good, didn't it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. Max Rushden, generous with your time as ever. Thank you so much.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.